This is the Grassy Knoll on this February 9th, 2005. We were supposed to have in the first hour John Turner, a former IRS officer who was with the organization known as Save a Patriot Fellowship. He tried to email me, God bless him, he did the right thing, but unfortunately I wasn't in the office to field him. When I called him and talked to him, it was quite obvious that he had no voice. So very graciously, the guest that we had for our second hour, Philip D. Collins, has stepped in. And although I'm a little bit unprepared, Philip, to introduce you is a very difficult thing. I would say to the audience, though, there are a number of articles by Philip out there, along with his brother Paul Collins, that deal with what we're facing today. And it's a very, very entangled web that we're talking about, but I believe the Collins brothers have done probably what I've seen is the best job thus far to try to tell people, look, this is where we're headed, and it's based on where we were. And Philip, you are the author, along with your brother, of the book, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century. And Philip, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for stepping in like this. I never thought we were going to get our first 2 hours this way.
Well, anytime. It's
all right.
No problem.
Thank you. And if you have to go scramble for material, I understand that, and we'll deal with that if we have to.
Sure.
All right. Thank you. I'm going to say that what drew my attention to you was the article that I found through Corbin's A Closer Look, entitled the
semiotic deception of 9/11.
Of September 11th, yes. Now, I think most of us do understand the concept of semiotic, but not in that term. Now, can you tell us, for instance, I'm assuming that it's close to symbology, but will you tell us what semiotic is all about?
Absolutely. Actually, symbology is a subsidiary of semiotics. Semiotics is basically the study of signs. That's a somewhat overly simplified definition. The field also concerns itself with the application of signs in human discourse. Moreover, signs aren't just images. Spoken and written words also constitute signs. So the field really encompasses all human communication. Its significance in conspiracy research is its potential for deciphering the esoteric symbology of the secret societies that comprise the ruling class religion. Many of these symbols are actually presented before the public eye, yet the commoner is only familiar with the exoteric or denotative meaning of the symbol. Meanwhile, the esoteric or connotative meaning of the symbol is tangibly enacted right before our very eyes every day. For instance, very few Americans are even remotely familiar with the connotative meaning of the Great Seal that adorns our currency. But the semiotician can probably discern more just by examining the sign itself. That's not to suggest that every semiotician will recognize the Great Seal's conspiratorial nature, but they will be able to develop some fragmentary understanding. For instance, the semiotician would see the truncated pyramid and draw the inference of an unfinished ongoing project. The all-seeing eye would give the semiotician the inference of divine providence, although not necessarily a divine providence that is consistent with biblical Christianity. The Latin phrase annuit coceptus would reinforce this inference, meaning he blesses this undertaking in the original Latin. And the other Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, which means out of many one, would suggest some sort of monistic preoccupation with oneness. But already the semiotician has discerned a lot more than your average Joe. And all this was derived from the simple study of that sign, which adorns the back of our currency, and is why semiotics is so important and so integral to conspiracy research.
Let me pin you down also while we are on the back of the dollar bill, because that is an exceptionally interesting piece of paper. There is also the words, is it not Novo Ordo Seclorum?
Absolutely. Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is Latin for New Order of the Ages, or New Secular Order. Basically, the seclorum part suggests a secular order, which will Of course, secularization has been commonly associated with atheism, although men like sociologists like William Sims Bainbridge have made clear that secularization actually doesn't represent the obliteration of religion, but instead the clearing of the spiritual marketplace for a brand new theocratic order. So really you have there already the inference, the connotative meaning being that the spiritual vacuum that will be left after the demise of Christianity, which is one of the goals of the elite, will be a new theocratic order with a brand new God and a brand new state-sanctioned religion.
A couple of things. Before, when you were talking about the commoner or the common person not understanding, it's not because they don't have the sagacity, it's because they really are veiled, are they not, from these semiotics?
Yes. The commoner, again, is only familiar with the denotative meaning. The denotation of a sign is basically the sign's literal meaning. You see an eagle, that's pretty much what you see, an eagle, a bird. But the connotative meaning for, say, the eagle has been a symbol of Americanism. It's symbolic of Americanism, symbolic of courageousness, and all those qualities that are embodied within Americanism. We see those also portrayed in the eagle in its connotative meaning. Likewise, you see, regular citizen sees the obelisk in Washington, D.C., denotatively, they see just that, an obelisk, a long protrusion from the ground. But connotatively, it's really a symbol of phallic worship that dates back to Nimrod and the Babylonian mystery religions. Also,
to revisit the back of the dollar, what is your understanding, not that it's a real big point, but what is your understanding about when that verbiage and design was delivered to the United States? Now, I know that FDR commissioned it to be put on the back of the dollar, but did it not reach the United States long before that? What's your take on that?
Well, as I understand it, it was presented to the founding fathers, and I don't remember exactly who it was that presented it to some of the founding fathers, but it's a symbol that dates back quite a ways. It dates back all the way to Egypt, to ancient Mesopotamia. What's interesting about the symbol, the Great Seal, is the fact that, as you said, it was introduced to our currency by FDR. Really, it's a symbol of scientism, which scientism is basically the epistemological belief that all knowledge is derived through science, and absolute primacy is bestowed upon science. And while that seems, kind of desirable, being that we have so much faith in science nowadays, the problem is that science or scientism is basically it's a unit of it's a system of measurement, and as a system of measurement, it has to preclude those things that outstrip its finite units of measurement, and those things include human dignity, liberty, individuality, the spirit, the soul, and so these things will be precluded according to a scientific society, and that's exactly what the Great Seal, the truncated pyramid, all that represents, is a scientific, new scientific theocratic order.
A number of things now as we see more listeners coming on the stream. This is the Grassy Knoll. This is Visigoth. I am with Philip Darrell Collins. In the first hour, we were to have had on John Turner from Save the Patriot Foundation. He came up hoarse, which is really a blow, because last night I spoke to him at between 7 and 8 p.m. his time out in California, and he was in full voice, but when I went to call him just a couple of minutes ago, he sounded like somebody who was about 115. However, in the second hour, we were to have had on Philip Darrell Collins, and he's been gracious enough to join us in this first hour, and it is with he that we are talking. And I as I had said earlier in the program, was drawn to him because of an article that appeared, just in one of these email lists, which was entitled "The Semiotic Deception of September 11th." And Philip, if we can go back to talk about some of the imagery and a final little note to this Novo Ordo Seclorum.
Mm-hmm.
That is from Virgil, the poet, is it not?
Yes, I believe so. I have heard other scholars suggest other authors, but so far that seems to be the most likely of authors.
Well, what's doubly interesting is that in George Bush's inaugural address last month, he cited that exactly as it is, and he called it a new order of the ages.
Absolutely.
What I found interesting, though, was a while ago, Bill Moyers, whom we all know from PBS, held a town hall meeting, and he conjured a Virgil statement, but completely left out the word order. He said it was a new age of the beginning, or a new beginning of the ages. And I was like, well, what about that Latin word ordo there, Bill? I think there was something inherent in his not wanting to refer to that particular word because of the obvious connotation or denotation, and that is New World Order.
Yeah, and also I think it was almost intention that he would use the designation of age, because being that New Age is the New Age. Yeah. It's the capstone of the religious movement that underpins the drive for global government.
Excellent point, because he swapped out one thing for another, and we had Chris Pinto on, a documentary filmmaker of the series Megiddo, who dealt in the second installment with the New Age religions and the twists on such that are entering Christianity. And you're right, I never thought about that until now, but you lose the orders, but you gain the New Ages, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And the age that they are believe that they are basically initiating, that they're bringing in, is the age of Aquarius, which was supposed to be the new antithetical age, a age that's antithetical to the age of Pisces, which is commonly associated with Christianity. And now the new deity is an emergent deity that is of an apotheosized or deified man, so-called with it, and has been written with a capital M, so as to denote his purported intrinsic divinity
and godhood.
Absolutely.
I asked this of Chris Pinto, and I'm only asking you because I am curious for myself. I don't know how many of the listeners have heard of this tape series, which dates back now over 20 years. I can't believe it. Are you familiar with Constance Cumby's series, The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow?
Yes, as a matter of fact, yes. It's a excellent book, too. Excellent book.
When did you encounter that? Did you encounter that 20 years ago, as I had, or recently, or?
More recently, my brother, who's also the co-author of the book, had also introduced me to it. I noticed that in it, Constance Cumby brings to light the New Age movement's chronic references to Aryans, to emergent new deity in mankind, and that this was analogous to the Aryans, which of course are now of Nazi infamy. But you find that doctrine very much present also in Nazi Germany. This idea of humanity becoming God, that they ascribe the term Aryan to it, almost really doesn't have much to do with blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, so much as it has to do with a new breed of man who's coming into being through the processes of evolution, which, by the way, is a doctrine of transformism that basically dates back to Mesopotamia and was just really popularized by Charles Darwin in the beginning of the latter half of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century.
One question about this Aryan race, as you mentioned. This is something we're thinking about the Germanic Uberman, but that really, it goes back so far, and were these people, do you know, necessarily Anglos? Were they Hindus or?
Actually, the Aryans, or the concept of Aryanism, as I understand it, is really not really humanity at all. It's actually a post-human condition. It's a kind of quasi-Gnostic concept where humanity will evolve beyond the point to where it's no longer recognizable as a human being. And you've seen this belief system time and time again. You mentioned the Übermensch, which basically was the term that was coined by Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, right?
Yeah, Nietzsche also said that humanity was something to be overcome. So it's really a point at which humanity has overcome its own humanity and ceases to be human. And this we've seen this before, of course, with Hitler's Aryan. We've seen it with Nietzsche. We've seen it in communist Russia with the so-called Soviet man. And despite cultural variations and modifications, the myth remains the same. And basically, it's also a Freemasonic myth. If you read the book W.M. Wilmshurst, The Meaning of Masonry, basically on page, I think, 47, he basically says that the real purpose of modern Masonry, which was also the purpose of the ancient mysteries, was to expedite this evolution of man towards this post-human state, towards this state where he's no longer man, but he is, in fact, God.
Chris Pinto dealt with that a lot because that seems to be, of course, as we know, especially as it pertains to Scripture, that the sin that cast Satan out of heaven was to be as God.
Yes.
And so when that finds itself traveling down the food chain to a Homo sapiens, it's no different. And I think we might be witnessing that right now with science, as you said, even with the cloning of life and the creation of life, and perhaps some areas that we might not want to venture down, but we are certainly doing that today.
Certainly.
Now, we had spoken about doing a series, and we will do that. It will not necessarily be live every Wednesday, but we are going to do it in an episodic arrangement. And talking to Philip thought that a good title would be The Magicians of Mutability. This would be an overarching title for the series. And when you came up with that, Philip, what were you addressing necessarily with that title?
Okay. Well, basically, mutability. Mutability is basically the potential for a species to mutate or to change. You have that sort of jargon also used by the ancient alchemist. The mutability of silver or
metals.
Lead into gold, base metal, which was actually a cover for their actual purpose, which was the mutability of humanity into superhumanity. But basically, the elite believe that this mutability can be facilitated today now through science. And it's interesting because if you take the word technology and you take away its original root, which is techne, it means craft. And craft is, of course, associated with witchcraft. And witchcraft, of course, is associated with the term Wicca, which means to bend, as in the bending of reality, and also as in the bending of human nature. But it's interesting because many modern contemporary scientists and theoreticians now pretty much openly admit that this is really just a new incarnation of magic. For instance, I believe his name's Mark Pesky. Yeah, Mark Pesky, who's the co-inventor of virtual reality modeling language. He wrote, and I quote now, "The enduring archetype of techne within the pre-modern era is magic of an environment that conforms entirely to the will of being," unquote. So really, what we have is the new breed of magicians, or the scientists, or the scientific elite, and they intend on transforming man through the sorcery of technology.
Yeah, and they certainly are not doing this in and of themselves, but they are most definitely being financed and backed and funded by the powers that be. We call them global elitists. In the United States, Philip, I don't know how you feel about it, but we look at it as the foundations in particular, like Rockefeller and Ford and Carnegie.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And this is going on globally, it's just not here. We understand that. So, somebody said something about, it's funny, but if you were to ask people about their trustworthiness of science, they would probably give it a pretty high grade. I mean, yeah, they just look at it as like, well, they know more than we do.
Sure. But
I had read an article once that warned, and we're going to go to the scientific dictatorship, which is one of the cornerstones of our getting together, one of the articles you wrote. But, I mean, scientists lie too.
Yeah, they sure do. And again, the problem is that science being what it is, it's finite in nature, and it does not take into account the infinite. As a measuring stick, it must exclude certain things that no longer fit the stick, and that includes the soul, that includes the spirit, that includes human dignity and liberty, and these things are precluded when you take a scientific approach towards the configuration of society. A society that is completely and totally configured along the contours of science is one that is completely stripped of liberty. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure you probably read the report from Iron Mountain. Mm-hmm. In that report, I think that the authors put it quite succinctly. They basically say that with a scientifically regimented society, that axiomatic values, as they put it, become non-existent. And those axiomatic values include all those things that you and I value, which are liberty and our dignity and our freedom. So, yeah, absolutely.
I want to let everybody know, again, as we are early into the program, perhaps many people looking for John Turner from Save a Patriot Foundation, but he was taken suddenly under the weather, and with us is the guest for the second hour, who has graciously agreed to come on for the first hour, and that is Philip D. Collins. Now, what I want to do is, if people are listening on the Internet, and by the way, TK out there in Northern Illinois, sorry that we didn't have John on, but I know you're interested in this just as well. Where are the bulk of your articles available?
The bulk...
I mean, is Biped one of those sites?
Yeah, the bulk is the main groundwork for all my work can be found on Biped, which is basically all one word, BIPED.info, www.biped.info. The website is largely a website for the intelligent design movement, which all the positions of the theoreticians that comprise that movement don't necessarily endorse my views, nor I endorse theirs. But the main purpose of the website is to present an alternative to Darwinian evolution. My articles largely concern themselves with exposing the occult with the entry of the human race into the 21st century.
Also, we want to tell people, do you have a website, by the way?
No, I sure don't. Only the websites for the book.
Okay. All right. And let me give that now. The book that you and your brother co-authored is entitled The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an Examination of Epistemic Autocracy from the 19th to the 21st Century. That's available at the website www.iuniverse.com/bookstore. And also, really, if they go onto the web, as I've done with you, and they would do a search on you and your brother, they would come up with these outlets, would they not?
Yes, absolutely. That and also Amazon.com, BarnesandNobles.com. There's a multiplicity of outlets for the book.
All right. Now, addresses 9/11, which is a very touchy subject, obviously, for a lot of people, but one in which we also have dealt with from the years since it happened.
Certainly.
What struck you about exactly what the title says, and that is, what about the semiotic deception of September 11th? Can we go into that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the semiotic deception basically began several years before 9/11 and was part of a larger project that researcher Michael Hoffman calls sci-fi predictive programming. Essentially, through literature and films, science fiction acts as a transmission belt for globalist and occult thought. Science fiction has been called the literature of ideas, and this is a very appropriate designation because the pre-September 11th world represented what I characterize as an ideational contagion, or a contagion of ideas, that was promulgated in no small part by science fiction. For instance, there was Independence Day, which was replete with globalist rhetoric. Plot inconsistencies basically betrayed the film's own globalist agenda. The title denotes a struggle for freedom against some entrenched oppressor. However, the aliens in the film, if you pay attention, close attention to the film, were not intent upon subjugation. They were bent on genocide. Thus, the connotative meaning of the film's title suggests reconceptualizing of America and America's tradition of Independence Day, our traditional notions of what it means to be independent and free, and thus making us conform more to a globalist framework of world government. And that's exactly what happens in the film Independence Day. Nearing the end, basically, you witness the amalgamation of all nation-states, including America, into a global superstate. But Independence Day's role in the semiotic deception of the masses reached its nadir with 9/11, as is evidenced by an intertextual reference made by MSNBC journalist Ron Insania on the day of the WTC attacks. In an interview with Matt Lauer and Tom Brokaw and Katie Couric, Insania likened the WTC attacks to Independence Day. And Professor Elliot Gaines, who's a semiotician and broadcast journalist critic, also one of my mentors in semiotics, observed that this allusion to a commonly known cultural text, being Independence Day, which is basically known now thanks to mass media all over the world, irrespective of your cultural background, that reference would alter the paradigmatic character of 9/11. According to Gaines, Independence Day's narrative binary opposition of good versus evil was imposed on the events of 9/11. So suddenly the good humans that you saw in Independence Day,
right,
became America. And all of a sudden the evil aliens became the Arabs. And this deception was further augmented by NBC's conscious use, and I say conscious because they were quite aware of the fact that they were using archived footage of Palestinian demonstrators accompanied by a title card reading earlier this morning. Now, Couric read along with this an unverified wire from the West Bank stating that the demonstration was a celebration of the WTC attacks. But NBC would later confess openly that its use of the archive footage with an unverified wire constituted a breach of ethics. But it was too late. The damage was already done. Already in the eyes of America, the Arab world was the source of all our woes, and the paradigmatic template of Independence Day, which good humans against evil aliens, was imposed on 9/11. Meanwhile, the supranational elite who were responsible for the creation of bin Laden and the activation of America's national security apparatus remained hidden behind a semiotic mirage. But that's basically how, the role that Independence Day, which was just one of the many sci-fi predictive programming films, played in September 11th. It may as well. You may as well have had a movie poster with September 11th written across it in the same picture of the the now famous picture of the alien craft blasting the White House to bits, posted on every billboard in America. That was basically the paradigmatic character that the elite imposed upon the event.
Well, 2 points. One, and this is specific. I was caught back in my native New Jersey. I'd gone back to visit, and when 9/11 occurred, I was there. And reports we were getting, and I lived in Northeast New Jersey, and for those who need like fixed points, that would be like Hackensack and Teaneck and Fort Lee. And along I-80, there's a town of considerable size called Patterson, and we were getting, I guess, reports verbally, and I believe there was some on local media that were saying and showing films of supposed Arabs rejoicing in what took place, and that there had been some blowback from another ethnic community, the blacks of Patterson, against the Muslims for celebrating. This never, ever, in the end, was proven true. So not only, as you cite, Philip, did it take place on NBC New York, Channel 4, but it was happening also across the river in other neighborhoods. Now, whether this was concerted, we don't know, but certainly it did help resonate the fact that the Arabs are the bad guys, the Muslims are the bad guys, and we're the good guys.
Absolutely.
Now, again, regarding 9/11 and the movie Independence Day, and I sent you something that was a rough draft of an article soon to be published about the symbology that has been laid in movies, if you will, almost as far back as 10 years ago. Do you think this 9/11 situation, as laid out by Osana, and also the hearkening back to Independence Day, do you believe this was all orchestrated, this was deliberate?
Yes, I do. I believe that semiotic intimations were already thoroughly embedded in mass media and in our basically our subconscious years in advance, perhaps even decades. Not to say that the elite were able to perfectly orchestrate 9/11. Right on some sort of a time clock or some sort of a schedule, but the groundwork, I guess the psychocognitive groundwork was laid well in advance. For instance, you take the cultural milieu that basically surrounded the pre-9 September 11th world. Witnessed a film in 1997 called Starship Troopers, which was, of course, based on the Robert Heinlein novel. But in the analysis of the movie, film critic Jeffrey Whitehall states that the narrative paradigm is premised upon the assertion that, and now I'm quoting him, quote, the sovereign state relies on the creation of an external threat to author its foreign policy, unquote. Now, the very same year of Starship Troopers' release, former National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski published The Grand Chessboard. And The Grand Chessboard is an extremely important book because the Grand Chessboard basically lays out the geostrategy that the neoconservative faction of the elite are now tangibly enacting in the Middle East, the East, in Iraq and Afghanistan and what have you. But at any rate, in Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, he says, and I'm quoting, America may find it more difficult to fashion a consensus on foreign policy issues except in the circumstance of a truly massive and widely perceived direct external threat, unquote. Again, the semiotic intimations were embedded within pop culture, within pop entertainment, to prepare America and Americans for an external threat, and that the notion is that our foreign policy relies on the existence of external threats, which is kind of a Hegelian notion, because the notion is that we are, in order for any sovereign state to exist, we're going to require conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So this goes back, way back. I mean, it even goes as far back as the film 2001: A Space Odyssey. In 2001: The Space Odyssey, the basic one of the semiotic markers in that is the monolith, and the monolith acts as a signal that human evolution is moving on to its next glorious step, and that something big is about to happen. Well, lo and behold, New Year's in 2001, basically in Magnuson Park, a monolith appeared. Nobody knew where it came from. It was very well sculpted, very well made, and the city and people were debating its fate, but then it disappeared. So evidently the idea was that conveyed was that humanity is on to its next step, onto evolution. And that, very same year, Osama bin Laden and the rest of the alleged perpetrators of 9/11 basically destroyed the WTC. So again, yes, the semiotic signposts are all there.
Now, I had sent to you, did you get a chance to look at that at all, that rough draft of an article yet to be published?
No, not yet, no.
Okay, no problem, but this gentleman is looking into what he would term the symbology of 9/11 in films going back more than 10 years ago. And he's also offered them, as he's gone along, with the caveat that, well, this might be a coincidence, I understand that, but I would rather show it than not. And again, like he said, there's reasons why, if, for instance, and I'm really roughly remembering this, in a certain movie, a person is standing between a bank of elevators, and it's a long shot, I guess, and he's standing between 9 and 11. Now, you could be standing between 11 and 13, or
sure.
7 and 9. I mean, now, yeah, sure, it could be a coincidence, but,
sure.
We have to look back at this and wonder if we are being prepared by mass communications, to include TV and movies, for some kind of, what would you think would be the game, Philip? I mean, why would they be doing this to us unless it's some kind of like little dirty Illuminati trick and the joke is on us?
I personally feel that it's psychocognitive warfare, that it's used, first off, to breed what's known as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is basically a state of psychological paralysis when people don't know what to do and which way to go. It's kind of like if you were to place a dog in a room. You get the dog to salivate at the sound of a bell and everything, because you keep bringing it food every time you sound the bell. And then you turn off the lights and beat the dog, and so every time you turn off the lights, that acts as the dog's cue to, basically cower in a corner and everything. Then all of a sudden you do both at the same time, ring a bell and turn out the lights. And what the dog does is it freezes up. Likewise, the American public basically was paralyzed because the cognitive dissonance that was bred through the symbology that was conveyed through mass media for years and years and years, and everything, it had instilled in them, this sense of uncertainty. And so what happened and everything? Well, the powers that be took it from there, and there was very little in the way of dissenting voices. I also think that it's used to also basically comfortably acclimate us to the future societal models that they would have us accept. For instance, and me and Michael Corbin discussed this on a Closer Look, but we were discussing the University of Denver Merle which was
the murals.
Yeah, it's a mural titled "The Digital Transformation."
Okay.
And basically, this mural shows a DNA double helix issuing forth from a goddess's hands, and as the mural continues to ascend into the stars, it transforms into a series of ones and zeros. Well, what this semiotically gesticulates towards is the hypothetical concept of cyber survival, which is a theory of technological resurrection and immortality. Now, you'll notice how the theory plagiarizes the Judaic, Christian, and Islamic concepts of death and rebirth. But now, however, the context is overtly scientistic. So, sci-fi predictive programmer Arthur C. Clarke prophesied this digital transformation in the novel The City and the Stars. And in the extremely influential book, which was more recently published, The Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil, that author asserts that this digital transformation could be achieved through magnetic resonance imaging or some sort of technique of reading and simulating the human brain's neural structure within a computer. But thus, man becomes a god, the spirit of which inhabits cyberspace and finds incarnation in a corporeal body that's maintained through nanotechnology and what have you. But Ray Kurzweil was not, some sort of a marginalized, kooky cult leader. He's been involved in the founding and development of 9 businesses, one of which deals with virtual reality. But you can see where in that mural, people are being acclimated to a future societal model that the elite wish to bring about.
Do you think that, and we're talking about the Denver Airport murals, am I correct?
Actually, it's this was the University of Denver mural. Although the DIA, the Denver International Airport, also has quite a few interesting murals and pictures that semiotically also gesticulate towards similar themes.
And really, isn't it interesting that at that airport, and again, a friend of mine flies for an airline that goes into Denver, and I asked him to check that out, and this is a gentleman who wants no part of conspiracies, and he indicated, yep, they're there, and they are a little curious.
Yeah.
He also saw that the official name of the airport was New World Airport.
Yeah.
And there is a Masonic capstone.
Absolutely.
And the one thing he asked me after all this was, what I can't understand, and he asked it kind of rhetorically, not that he asked, he needs to talk to me about aviation, but he said to me, he goes, what I don't understand is that airport is so ill-used. Why are they building so many new runways? And I said to him, not for what's happening now, for what's yet to come. And I won't lead you down that way, but you can respond to it if you wish, Philip. And
sure.
Our take is, Harry and myself on the Grassy Knoll, is that in time to come, Washington will be obliterated, and the capital of perhaps the American Union, the 34-nation Western Hemisphere, will be in Denver. Any take on that at all?
Well, at this point, my take would probably be speculative as well. But I also think there's a possibility that DIA could serve as a potential, and I don't want to sound alarmist, but a potential internment camp facility. I mean, that sounds a bit, doomsday-esque, but
not on this program.
Yeah. But there was a book that was recently released. I can't remember the author's name, but basically it was apologetics in favor for the internment of Japanese citizens in Manzanar during World War II, which we know now was an atrocity. But yet the author writes this polemic in favor of it, and that then there's discussions of possible internment camps for potential terrorists nowadays under Ashcroft. So that's also another potential application of the DIA. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of it's really ill used. There's a lot of facilities and a lot of stuff there that has yet to even be really employed in any sort of real function yet.
It's interesting too, because one of the things I did was I went back to, I think it was a 1968 issue of, you remember Look magazine, or do you remember your folks having it on the coffee table?
Yeah, it's I remember it was it was quite a popular magazine in its time.
And I was amazed to find, and of course I was 17 at the time, and for whatever reason I wasn't paying attention, but I believe it was the managing editor of Look wanted to address this bit. I guess it was about rumored detention camps. And you have to remember, at that time, you have a very split country about Vietnam. You do have some very hot spots in America with regard to racial problems. And so the idea that they were out there was not necessarily a far-fetch. And this gentleman, working for a mainstream publication like Look, said they're out there.
Yeah. Well, the Village Voice not too long ago released an article over potential prison camps. And the Village Voice is by no means, a conspiracy theory journal or some sort. It is a bit left wing, but it nonetheless their authors have acknowledged that that possibility. And I used to be kind of skeptical, and again, you can't believe everybody that throws a set of schematics in front of your face and tells you that that's exactly what you're looking at is a concentration camp. But at the same time, I don't see how it could not happen again, because frankly speaking, all the same historical precedents that preceded the establishment of the Nazi concentration camps. We've seen them mirrored here in the events of the post 9/11 world. So, my general response to the critic on that is, okay, hey, I hope you're right, but tell me if it is true, what the heck is to stop them? What the heck is to keep it from happening again?
Yeah, and even if it's not for detention of what dissidents, whatever that would mean, but also when we're looking at this national vaccination program and those who may choose not to want to be vaccinated, you've got a number of causes whose end might be in quarantining people, if that's a better word for detaining them.
Yes.
And also, I don't know if you've seen this at all, Philip, but we've come upon on the Military Zone website a handbook for officers as to how to deal with certain grades of prisoners, to include civil internees, which basically are American citizens inside the U.S.
That's right, and many of the FEMA classes, they already have had instructors who basically vilify our founding fathers, and then of course vilify patriotic Americans. And it's interesting because that word patriotism has been also basically semiotically tweaked in the post-September 11th world. You notice that in the pre-September 11th world, the patriot, the appellation of patriot, connotatively was derisive. It meant terrorist. It meant well, you're just a bigoted militia militia member. And now with in the post September 11th world, thanks to the Patriot Act, that word has again been semiotically tweaked, but now it's been kind of reinducted into the cultural lexicon of preferential phrases. Now it takes on a brand new meaning, and patriotism becomes synonymous with fighting terrorism, and fighting terrorism becomes synonymous with informing on your neighbor, submitting to wiretaps, submitting to surveillance.
Searches.
So I mean, again, the semiotic seeds were there for that little cultural transformation that we now see underway.
We are with Philip Collins, who is the author, as well as with his brother, on the book, and I'm looking for it now because that is one mouthful. It is The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century. And that's available. It's online. You can order it through www.iuniverse.com/bookstore. Also, would you please, once again, Philip, for our new listeners in this waning half hour, tell them where they can go to find some of the articles that you and your brother have written?
Sure. You can find all my articles, which lay the groundwork for the book, can be found at www.biped.info, and just click the article link. You can also find some of my articles at the Conspiracy Archive. That's all one word, www.conspiracyarchive.com. You can also find some of Paul's articles at paranoiamagazine.com. They have, just click the articles link and you should find it. It's titled I'm trying to remember the name of it. It's The Psychology of Abu Ghraib, Elite Thought and Iraqi Prisoner Abuse by Paul David Collins. And you can also find at www.nexusmagazine.com. On the articles link, you can also find The Hidden Face of Terrorism, which is basically an excerpted article from my brother's first book.
Okay, and he does have a book out there extant that is titled The Hidden Face of Terrorism. Is that correct?
Yeah, the whole title is The Hidden Face of Terrorism, The Dark Side of Social Engineering from Antiquity to September 11th.
And we hope, obviously, to have him join us in this series. In this series that has been titled, that we're going to revisit the Collins brothers, and that is The Magicians of Mutability. And we're going to go on to some more specific items, but I want to revisit something that you did say, if I could.
Sure.
And I want to know your opinion about when you see Brzezinski writing the Grand Chessboard back in, 1995, 1996?
Yeah, somewhere in that. Yeah,
right.
That
And he talks about, did you pick up on this at all? That the United States should be careful not to agitate an axis of Iran, China, and Russia.
Yeah. It's interesting because the whole time he kind of dances around, that whole I guess you could call it alliance. Evidently Brzezinski saw the ties between those nations, the ties between those nations tightening, and it's interesting because it's almost as though he knows that that's going to become part of the new dialectic and everything. That's going to be the new dialectic that will comprise a new Cold War.
But, now let me ask you this in the framework of the article you did on the semiotics of 9/11.
Sure.
And with some of this hidden imagery in movies and such in preparation, don't you think, that's a loaded question. Let me ask you this.
Uh-huh.
Do you think Brzezinski is so very prescient, or do you believe that he knows what the plan is given the crowd he hangs with, and again, he's laying this in early for a time yet to come?
I think I really doubt that Brzezinski is ignorant of really what he's saying. I think that he has a good idea. Really, when I read the Grand Chessboard, what I took from it was he was basically delineating the geostrategy that would ensure the Western elites, the Western elites that are here in the United States, global primacy in whatever form of global government that we would see eventually come to pass and everything. And so I think that he knows that that we run the risk now of basically inciting some hostilities between us and the Chinese and the Russians and what have you, because we've basically stepped into geostrategically sensitive sensitive locations. So yeah, he's probably well aware of what he's proposing and what's on the horizon.
Do you think in any terms, though, that this is a warning to us subliminally?
Yeah,
I know it's a tough one, but
sure.
Just tell me what you think, because I find it. When I read that, I'm saying I'm paying attention to this. If he stated it more than once, and I'm telling you, if he stated it, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But tell me how you feel about that.
I think it's kind of like a heads up to be anticipating eventual conflict with the East. I think that him being former national security advisor, and his basically one of his fortes being geostrategy. Yeah, he kind of knows that is what's on the horizon. You can also probably bet that in the future, what you're going to see in terms of films. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw films that now took a more hostile approach towards the East in general, specifically China and Russia. Again, you're going to see a resurgence of films that are akin to the old Manchurian Candidate, Red Dawn, and what have you. Because basically that's what we have being promulgated here is a new Cold War and a new dialectic, a new Hegelian dialectic, the framework of which has been laid through our imperialistic geostrategy.
As we draw up against the hour, and what I'll do is, if you don't mind, we'll give each other about a 4-minute break at the top of the hour.
Sure. And
then rejoin. But I want to throw this out to you because in the article that I forwarded to you, the individual who's dealing with the 9/11 symbology in films and TV also talked about. Oh, let me think. Oh, jeez, I'm trying to figure out. I lost my train of thought. And I know it's got to do with 9/11, and I'm trying to nail it down. Can't do it. So we'll shift gears.
Sure.
Still dwelling around 9/11. Are you aware of the first mention of that date inside the United States by Daddy Bush?
No, I sure am not.
Well, this is why we're saying, what is going on really? There is a book out there, and in a previous show I cited it, I had it, I don't have it at my fingertips, and I cannot remember in total recall. But when Daddy Bush came over here, he referred to New World Order in a congressional gathering on 9/11, I believe it was 1990 or 1991.
Really?
Yeah, we're not going to split hairs. Chris Pinto also, in his first installment of the Megiddo series, cited a number of other politicians talking about New World Order on 9/11 and years gone by. So again, this is what I'm saying to you. I mean, I know where I was going with this. I got it. I'm back together again. This all joins in with what the writer had used from our radio show with Dr. Rebecca Carley, who had said, and I'm going to just summarize this. She said, in their sick Masonic minds, if they tell you they're going to do it to you before they do it, it's okay, like it's honorable to do such. And this is what I want to throw out to you as this hour ends. Do you see in your study and your awareness of spirituality and the fact that you understand that there's a satanic takeover coming, do you see where the Illuminati, or whatever you want to call it, is really preoccupied with numerology and loves this sort of thing?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, one need only look at Washington D.C. You have,
yes.
I mean, the whole area is replete with symbology, with numerology. I mean, you have the Pentagon. It has 5 sides. 5 is the number associated with Mars, the god of war. You have the Washington Monument, which is an obelisk, a fertility symbol, comes from the story of Osiris and Isis,
right,
which is an allegorical account of Nimrod and Semiramis. Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and I think that also the reason that the elite, that numerology and symbology is so important to them is they're extremely superstitious bunch of people, and they believe that these numbers, that these symbols have occult significance, and will, imbue them somehow with power, and that's why it's important that they try to draft some of their plans within the framework of these esoteric myths.
Well, in the occult, would you not agree that numerology is very strong? I mean, I would say that's one of the reasons, and this is another whole ball of wax about one of the why some Christian holidays were hijacked and placed very closely to Druidic dates.
Absolutely.
I mean, they we laugh about Christmas. I'm sorry, Philip, I don't know how you feel about it.
Oh, no, I agree with you entirely on that.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real it's a real hot button. But I mean, historians have placed Jesus's birth, his incarnation, somewhere within July and August, and I mean, it just seems to be awfully coincidental, that we now celebrate it on a December 25th, on a date that so many other different religious events converge at and everything. Same with Easter. I mean, really, that word Easter doesn't really have anything to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I mean, you have the Easter bunny seems harmless and innocuous enough, but really that's, again, a fertility symbol. So, I mean, absolutely.
Well, we always laughed about, all right, tell us what the connection is between rabbits and eggs. I don't get it.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, I guess it must be the Cadbury egg or something.
All right, before we go for our much heralded break, Philip, again, let me ask you this. I mean, with this book, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century, that's the subtitle. The overarching title is The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, which we'll pick up on in the second hour. Can anybody read that? I mean, you guys are brilliant. There's no two ways about it, you and your brother.
Oh,
but I mean, can people pick this up and say, okay, I identify with this, I understand it?
I certainly hope so. I mean, I know that the whole subtitle is quite a mouthful. If I could, I'll clarify that right now.
Sure.
When I refer to epistemic autocracy, epistemic relates to epistemology and is derived from the Greek word episteme, which means knowledge. So really what you have is an autocracy of knowledge, which also pertains to science. Science is derived from the original root scientia, which means knowledge. And so we have an autocratic control of science, of knowledge in society, which is redirected and used as a weapon against the masses. And that's why Huxley kind of characterizes it as a scientific dictatorship.
Yeah, and we're going to get into the scientific dictatorship, which just blew my mind when I saw you touch upon it. I was so glad that you guys did. And also,
thank you.
Well, I've been looking for that for a long time, and I tell you what, I don't get gushing about anybody, and who cares if I gush about anyone, but
yeah, sure.
I have to say that, well, I tell you what, when I saw this, I said, okay, this hits on everything that Harry and I have been talking about for a number of years, and you guys seem to be able to distill it, and on the same hand, expand it to make it very understanding for people who want to get into this, to realize that really there's no such thing as coincidence when it comes to especially what happens in mass media and how it does manipulate us.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like what my broadcast criticism instructor Elliot Gaines said. And by the way, he's not a conspiracy theorist, and he certainly wouldn't agree with me in all my views. In fact, he's more of a left winger. He basically put it succinctly. He's like, if you see it in a film or on a TV show, you can bet it was designed to be there.
Right.
There's nothing that a director doesn't place up there on the screen that isn't meant to be there. All
right, we're going to come back in the second hour and expand on that as well. Also, I'm going to ask you, Philip, the $64,000 question, that is there any such thing as science fiction? But we'll do that.
The field also concerns itself with the application of signs in human discourse. Moreover, signs aren't just images. Spoken and written words also constitute signs. So the field really encompasses all human communication. Its significance in conspiracy research is its potential for deciphering the esoteric symbology of the secret societies that comprise the ruling class religion. Many of these symbols are actually presented before the public eye, yet the commoner is only familiar with the exoteric or denotative meaning of the symbol. Meanwhile, the esoteric or connotative meaning of the symbol is tangibly enacted right before our very eyes every day. For instance, very few Americans are even remotely familiar with the connotative meaning of the Great Seal that adorns our currency. But the semiotician can probably discern more just by examining the sign itself. That's not to suggest that every semiotician will recognize the Great Seal's conspiratorial nature, but they will be able to develop some fragmentary understanding. For instance, the semiotician would see the truncated pyramid and draw the inference of an unfinished ongoing project. The all-seeing eye would give the semiotician the inference of divine providence, although not necessarily a divine providence that is consistent with biblical Christianity. The Latin phrase annuit coceptus would reinforce this inference, meaning he blesses this undertaking in the original Latin. And the other Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, which means out of many one, would suggest some sort of monistic preoccupation with oneness. But already the semiotician has discerned a lot more than your average Joe. And all this was derived from the simple study of that sign, which adorns the back of our currency, and is why semiotics is so important and so integral to conspiracy research.
Let me pin you down also while we are on the back of the dollar bill, because that is an exceptionally interesting piece of paper. There is also the words, is it not? This is the grassy knoll on this February 9th, 2005. We were supposed to have in the first hour John Turner, a former IRS officer who was with the organization known as Save a Patriot Fellowship. He tried to email me. God bless him, he did the right thing, but unfortunately I wasn't in the office to field him. When I called him and talked to him, it was quite obvious that he had no voice. So very graciously, the guest that we had for our second hour, Philip D. Collins, has stepped in, and well, although I'm a little bit unprepared, Philip, to introduce you is a very difficult thing. I would say to the audience, though, there are a number of articles by Philip out there, along with his brother Paul Collins, that deal with what we're facing today. And it's a very, very entangled web that we're talking about, but I believe the Collins brothers have done probably what I've seen is the best job thus far to try to tell people, look, this is where we're headed, and it's based on where we were. And Philip, you are the author, along with your brother, of the book, The Ascendancy of the Scientific Dictatorship, an examination of epistemic autocracy from the 19th to the 21st century. And Philip, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for stepping in like this. I never thought we were going to get our first 2 hours this way.
Well, anytime. It's
all right.
No problem.
Thank you. And if you have to go scramble for material, I understand that, and we'll deal with that if we have to.
Sure.
All right, thank you. I'm going to say that what drew my attention to you was the article that I found through Corbin's A Closer Look, entitled the
semiotic deception of 9/11.
Of September 11th, yes. Now, I think most of us do understand the concept of semiotic, but not in that term. Now, can you tell us, for instance, I'm assuming that it's close to symbology, but will you tell us what semiotic is all about?
Absolutely. Actually, symbology is a subsidiary of semiotics. Semiotics is basically the study of signs. That's a somewhat overly simplified definition that dates back to Nimrod and the Babylonian mystery religions.
Also, to revisit the back of the dollar, what is your understanding, not that it's a real big point, but what is your understanding about when that verbiage and design was delivered to the United States. Now, I know that FDR commissioned it to be put on the back of the dollar, but did it not reach the United States long before that? What's your take on that?
Well, as I understand it, it was presented to the founding fathers, and I don't remember exactly who it was that presented it to some of the founding fathers, but it's a symbol that dates back quite a ways. It dates back all the way to Egypt, to ancient Mesopotamia. What's interesting about the symbol, the Great Seal, is the fact that, as you said, it was introduced to our currency by FDR. Really, it's a symbol of scientism, which scientism is basically the epistemological belief that all knowledge is derived through science, and absolute primacy is bestowed upon science. And while that seems, kind of desirable, being that we have so much faith in science nowadays, the problem is that science or scientism is basically it's a unit of it's a system of measurement, and as a system of measurement, it has to preclude those things that outstrip its finite units of measurement, and those things include human dignity, liberty, individuality, the spirit, the soul, and so these things will be precluded according to a scientific society, and that's exactly what the Great Seal, the truncated pyramid, all that represents, is a scientific, new scientific theocratic order.
A number of things now as we see more listeners coming on the stream. This is the Gracianol. This Novo Ordo Seclorum?
Absolutely. Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is Latin for New Order of the Ages, or New Secular Order. And basically, the seclorum part suggests a secular order, which will, of course, secularization has been commonly associated with atheism, although men like sociologists like William Sims Bainbridge have made clear that secularization actually doesn't represent the obliteration of religion, but instead the clearing of the spiritual marketplace for a brand new theocratic order. So really you have there already the inference, the connotative meaning being that the spiritual vacuum that will be left after the demise of Christianity, which is one of the goals of the elite, will be a new theocratic order with a brand new God and a brand new state-sanctioned religion.
A couple of things. Before, when you were talking about the commoner or the common person not understanding, it's not because they don't have the sagacity, it's because they really are veiled, are they not, from these semiotics? Yes.
The commoner, again, is only familiar with the denotative meaning. The denotation of a sign is basically the sign's literal meaning. You see an eagle, that's pretty much what you see, an eagle, a bird. But the connotative meaning for, say, the eagle has been a symbol of Americanism. It's symbolic of Americanism, symbolic of courageousness, and all those qualities that are embodied within Americanism. We see those also portrayed in the eagle in its connotative meaning. Likewise, you see, regular citizen sees the obelisk in Washington, D.C., denotatively, they see just that, an obelisk, a long protrusion from the ground. But connotatively, it's really a symbol of phallic worship.
This is Visigoth. I am with Philip Darrell Collins. In the first hour, we were to have had on John Turner from Save the Patriot Foundation. He came up hoarse, which is really a blow, because last night I spoke to him at between 7 and 8 p.m. his time out in California, and he was in full voice, but when I went to call him just a couple of minutes ago, he sounded like somebody who was about 115. However, in the second hour, we were to have had on Philip Darrell Collins, and he's been gracious enough to join us in this first hour, and it is with he that we are talking. And I as I had said earlier in the program, was drawn to him because of an article that appeared, just in one of these email lists, which was entitled "The Semiotic Deception of September 11th." And Philip, if we can go back to talk about some of the imagery and a final little note to this Novo Ordo Seclorum.
Mm-hmm.
That is from Virgil, the poet, is it not?
Yes, I believe so. I have heard other scholars suggest other authors, but so far that seems to be the most likely of authors.
Well, what's doubly interesting is that in George Bush's inaugural address last month, he cited that exactly as it is, and he called it a new order of the ages.
Absolutely.
What I found interesting, though, was a while ago, Bill Moyers, whom we all know from PBS, held a town hall meeting, and he conjured a Virgil statement, but completely left out the word order. He said it was a new age of the beginning, or a new beginning of the ages. And I was like, well, what about that Latin word ordo there, Bill? I think there was something inherent in his not wanting to refer to that particular word because of the obvious connotation or denotation, and that is New World Order.
Yeah, and also I think it was almost intention that he would use the designation of age, because being that New Age is the New Age. Yeah. It's the capstone of the religious movement that underpins